Hello, I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. You're free to like or dislike the video, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like. The purpose of this channel is educative, so I try to educate people on issues of Bible, theology, deconversion issues, and various other atheist issues from the standpoint of somebody who used to be a believer, a pastor, and now is an atheist and a skeptic. So that's for you, then hang on. Today's Friday, and so I often do a Friday videos to address comments. A lot of my comments are in regards to the Clergy Project and in regards to my time with Lake Superior Freethinkers. So a lot of that's what's going to be on this. There's a few other sorted comments about biblical texts that I do want to dive into a little bit more deeply. So I don't really know how long this video is going to be, so I'm just going to address the comments and see. I want to do an adequate job on every one of them. After my last week's video, Freebird of Reason talked about, and I'm not going to read the full comment. I think it's fairly sensitive, but he talked about having to put his dog down and, who was suffering pain with cancer. He's thoughtful, sad about it, but the fact that nothing to deserve the pain, not a sinner, but still cursed, what a load of crap. That's one of the things that always bugged me and nagged me. Just to tell a little story, I owned a beagle that we call Gabriel Michael, and we actually gave him our last name, Gabriel Michael Rabyd. I've never owned a dog unless they were considered part of the family. So, occasionally I had to board a dog, but we would never get rid of our dog. I have a great deal of empathy for dogs. Cats like me for some reason. I'm not overly fond of them. But I have this kind of empathic way with dogs, but with Gabriel it was empathy back, and we developed a very close bond. I owned him from the time he was 6 months old until his death 15 years later, and I remember that moment when he died, and I thought about it. This is about the same time that I started really questioning my faith, looking back at it. So from an emotional standpoint, I think my dog's death had a little bit to do with it, because why in the hell would something as good and noble and as wonderful as Gabriel, the beagle, have to go through all that bullshit just because two people ate from a tree? That doesn't even make any logical sense in any sense of the world, let alone any theological sense, let alone any biblical sense. It's just kind of a dumb thing that the curse falls on us because a couple of people ate a piece of fruit. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I now kind of look back at it, and I'm also glad that my best friend for a long time, my dog, is free from pain. One of my best friends. And we had a good empathic relationship. One of the things that happened between me and him, I wrote a small blog article after his death. One of the things I mentioned about Gabriel was he knew when people were down, he knew people weren't up. I never saw Gabriel go to the wrong person when people were sad. Like if I was happy, but like one of my kids was sad, he would go to the sad kid and get up on their lap and make them feel better. He was just that way, and he was just a great dog, and so I feel that. I feel that comment a lot. He tells the story. Freebird also tells a story about the time he left his church, and they came to him, and the devil had gotten hold of him and everything else, and now he knows better that that's just a complete line of crap. I really love discussions about the devil when it comes to the Bible, because when you look at the devil in the Bible, I can't really see that the devil does anything too heinous. And a lot of the passages that are attributed to the devil, like, the morning star falling from heaven and all that stuff, that's actually specifically referencing an earthly ruler, and other people have endowed it with the idea of the devil. So there's a lot of good discussion about how the devil has nothing to do with the Bible. It has everything to do with just development of an idea throughout the ages. Pumpkin Guts 1. I know who you are now. Published a comment on my deconversion story, talking about how sorry it was so painful for you. There can be great joy and excitement in freeing oneself from the hocus pocus mumbo jumbo of religion. Relinquishing false beliefs frees you to search for what is really true. Learning about the Bible from a historical and academic perspective is exhilarating, and once undertaken, there's no going back. Thank you. I thank you for your sympathies. I look back 2 years ago when everything kind of blew up. I'm going through kind of a rough time right now. I had to talk to my therapist about this, but yesterday or 2 days ago. I'm going through a rough time because this is where a lot of things, the early part of August is really a lousy time for me from a standpoint of bad memories. But I've had this year I've had a good one. I thought the Lake Superior Freethinker thing was absolutely the shot in the arm I needed at the time, and so thank you for that opportunity. But yeah, it was rough, but I'm getting over it and I'm getting better. My mind is freer, and I think that's, on one hand, it's liberating. On the other hand, it's scary. Freedom has a tendency to be with that. Liberty and freedom are always scary because liberty and freedom don't have anything to do with safety. They have everything to do with the ability to choose what you want to do, to not be enslaved to something, because the opposite of liberty is slavery. And so when people want to give up liberty for security, I'll say, okay, you're accepting some form of slavery. And in religion, this happens a lot because people basically give up their intellect, they give up their thought processes and many of the decisions that they make for themselves, and they accept a slavery of somebody else's viewpoint, usually somebody that lived 2,000 or more years ago that was a goat humper somewhere, and now that I look at it, it really seems kind of silly and stupid. But yeah. And your comment about religion is true. I still enjoy studying religions, but I get the same thrill now out of opening a book of Norse mythology and reading it that I did also with the Bible. Having a biblical studies degree and having been my life for 20 years, I'm kind of done with that. I mean, I still use it for this channel, but it's not something that dominates my life as much as it used to. Rabyd Price says, I'm so glad the Clergy Project list helped many who are trapped in finding a way to move on. And I do like your honey, not vinegar ways. Well, thank you. I have never known forcing people to believe something to be good, or getting in their face or being angry at them to ever change a person's mind. And I didn't change my mind by some atheist getting in my face calling me stupid. Trust me, plenty of atheists did. And I have to caution my fellow atheist brothers, that's the stupidest thing to do. You really have to look at somebody that, in a way that you see them as a human being and say, I'm concerned that you're wasting your time with an imaginary character. That's all I'm saying. And then go about to prove it's imaginary. So I think that's a better approach, and knowing when to say what you want to say. I'm also very happy that the Clergy Project exists. I'm probably in a lot better position. Just enjoying, doing what needs to be done instead of, messing with all this imaginary crap. And the Clergy Project does a good job of, regardless of whether you've left the pulpit, in the process of leaving the pulpit, or you haven't left the pulpit, it doesn't matter. To me, all those people in that position that are professional clergy, in that position of losing their faith regardless, are my brothers and sisters. Okay, they are people that I understand, and I can rub shoulders with them and close ranks with them. I understand what they're going through. So it's really one of those things that, it really helped me a lot and still does. So there's that. After I did my reflection on the Lake Superior Freethinkers, Pumpkin Guts is, and she's one of the people there, and so it was nice to hear from her and know who she was. Those of us who had the good fortune to hear you in Duluth are still carrying on the discussion we reluctantly had to conclude. There are degrees of abuse, and my hope is that teachers and parents would consider the negative psychological impact some religious teachings have on impressionable minds. And I think that's a pretty good way to talk about that particular issue. Not all religious teachings are abusive. I would say a good chunk of them are nonsense, but they're not all abusive. I think the big abusive question is creating in the minds of a child that there's this person who loves them, but if they don't do what they say, they're going to roast them in fire eternity. That is an abusive relationship in a nutshell. If a woman comes up to me and says, he says he loves me, but, if I don't do what he says, he's going to beat me. That's hallmark, classic abusive spouse syndrome. Okay. And it's just bad. But God does it pretty much the same, and he gets away with it. And we create in a child's mind the acceptance of the idea that somebody can love us and also want to destroy us. And that's just not a good image to put inside a kid's head. Whether that's abusive or not, or just psychological manipulation, which can also be abusive, don't get me wrong, I think it's really people that are really experts in this really need to address this question. I mean, I address it as a former Bible theology guy, and I kind of look at it that way. I also want to thank the Freethinkers. If they're still talking about and discussing what I had to say, that's kind of my goal. I just want people to, getting people to discuss the issue to me is a big step forward, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate every opportunity I get to go. Free Bit of Reason. It says I managed to lock on. He says, I personally have been thinking a lot about how to best engage with the family members that probably believe. And I really must not fall out because, because the believer can fall out with the family. Scripture almost gives permission, as you may know, even though blood is thicker than water, not with belief. Okay, I get what you're saying. Yeah, it's funny how that works, isn't it? That family members will abandon family members over faith. But supposedly family is supposed to be the strongest thing on the planet. But faith allows us to make that exception. That somehow it's okay to cut family members loose if it's a faith issue. Anything else, you stick by your family. But the moment one family member decides to stop believing, it's okay to cut them off. They're not part of the family anymore. Really? I don't get that either. Let's see. I like street epistemology, Anthony. Yeah, I've heard of him. It's Anthony Magna Bosco. Yeah, I've heard of him. He's very interesting. I have watched a couple of his things. I like what he does. I just don't know. It really feels like evangelism back in Christianity to me, and I just have a nasty distaste of that at times, but I get what you're saying. He is very good at drawing out the discussion without being an asshole. And I think that's why people respond to him so well. There is room for this discussion. I think the real problem I have with the get offended crowd or the cancel culture crowd or any of this stuff is all of that just shuts down discussion. A person may not recognize, for instance, that they engage in a racist behavior. They just picked it up from their father or mother and didn't even realize it. And so when you confront them about it, you have to do it in such a way as to not assume that they're doing it deliberately. I think that's one of the biggest problems I have with a lot of people that are activists these days, is they assume that everybody is maliciously, deliberately doing the shit that they're doing. And I don't think that that's always true. I think culture is what it is. And you have to take a step back and ask the question, is this a deliberate thing? Or is this something that they've just learned? And also, when you're dealing with somebody who has a habit is a very difficult thing to get rid of. I'm going to give you, for instance, at my work, we have somebody who is going through trans. Okay, they're moving from being a male to a female. And I still even though I'm very accepting of that idea now, I still call her him from time to time, or call them their old name. I'm not going to go into the names there. I'm going to protect the identity of this person. But, if you were to come to my work, of course, it would become obvious. But my issue with myself is just, I don't mean to be that way. And I've had that discussion with this person a couple days ago. I said, if I slip up, it's not because I'm disrespecting you. It's just, I'm so used to calling you one thing, and now you're asking me to call you something else and to accept you're something else. And it's really hard. It's not just the trans person that has to transform a little bit. It's me. I've got to transform a little bit in my attitude, and that takes time. And I said, just, be patient with me. I'm not being a dick, I'm not being a jerk. It's just, I am so used to, after a year and a half of calling you one thing and assuming one thing based on how you presented yourself, and now you're switching, I have to really think about how to do it. That's true with religious stuff. That's true with political stuff. People ask me, as a political science guy, what bothers me the most. I says, I can't have a decent fucking conversation with anybody anymore. I can't sit down and talk about an issue without it being hyperly emotional and somebody getting offended by it. And that's the problem with discourse and discussion right now. And it's the problem with free speech, because everybody wants to shut down everybody else's speech instead of addressing what they're saying. And, to me, the answer is not censorship or embarrassing people or doing any of that stuff. The best answer to bad free speech is good free speech, is to counter it with something objective that you can prove. Do your homework, put out your stuff, make sure you're right. You might be wrong. And in the course of your research, you should just discuss you're wrong. And at that point, you go to the other person and say, hey, you know what? I'm looking at the research. And you know what? I was wrong. You're right. Okay, so where do we go from here? And that makes a lot more, you're going to build better relationships that will allow you to actually influence change in that person a lot better than getting in their face and doing shit. And, Anthony, that does street epistemology, he has a good way of doing that. I really enjoy watching him for techniques. I don't know if I'm the kind of guy that just goes out and looks for people to convert to atheism. It's just not my thing. I'd rather, look at other things and other avenues like this YouTube channel. Jonathan Ganish commented on the video, it's why he stopped going to atheist meetings. You realize it's religion haters. Now I realize live and let live. I get what you're saying, Jonathan. I go to these things and I try to be a good ambassador of how to do it the right way. Trust me, I found my religious meetings worse. But this group of people was really, really good. They were very gracious to me. They listened well. Even when we disagreed, I think we agreed that it was okay to disagree. And I'm also one of those guys that if I don't know, I just flat out tell you I don't know. Or if I haven't really thought through an issue, I'll tell you, hey, I just haven't thought through it. And I don't want to come down hard one way or the other until I've thought about the issue. I think most people accept those. If somebody's still going to be an asshole after you say that, well, then they're a lost cause anyway. But I don't necessarily go to atheist meetings for that reason either. My main thing with this is community. The one thing that church people are really better at than atheists and freethinkers is community. Sitting down and being able, sometimes you just got to rub your ideas off on somebody else of like mind. I think that's where Freethinkers Associations meeting once a month, is kind of a cool thing, because you can kind of find somebody that's of the same ilk and you can rub ideas off them. Ben Roberts, a day ago when I did, he actually commented on the 10 Commandments Suck, part 5, and I don't remember when I did that video. But he says, I found your channel while trying to understand why Exodus 34 has a different set of commandments and why the NT references the Exodus 20. I'm hoping for scholarly sources. My search seems to be full of Christian apologetics making stuff up that fits their theology. I didn't see much when trying to search this for Google Scholar. Any ideas, at least, of what I should look for? I can't tell you what to look for because I've done that search myself and experienced the same frustration. I think I gave you a short answer that involved that there's a lot of speculation because nobody really knows. Why do the New Testament writers reference Exodus 20 and Exodus 34? I think, quite frankly, it's because it's what their culture did at the time. The real problem with the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, the so-called writings of Moses, is this. It is pretty clear if you know, and I've sat down with Hebrew scholars that have kind of explained this to me, it's really, really clear that because of the style of the writing of Hebrew, the word choices, the order. I mean, for an example, if you handed me something written by Robert Heinlein, like a couple of chapters or so, and I read it without knowing who the author was, I could tell you it was Robert Heinlein because I know how he writes. I know his phraseology. I know how he does things. That's pretty true with a lot of other things too. I could tell you when something's from the Bible or it's from the Quran because the style is just different. This is, in Hebrew, this is very true. You can tell that the first 5 books of the Bible are written by at least 4 authors, if not more. And what they did, I think, is they mishmashed everything. Now, this goes to why they use Exodus 34. I think Exodus 20 and 34 were both listed as 10 commandments, but in different tribes. You need to remember the whole idea of 12 tribes coming together seems interesting to me. And I think it's these 12 tribes in the Persian Empire were trying to lay claim to this area. And they decided to pool their traditions and put them all together. That way, when they presented their petition to Xerxes or Cyrus, I can't remember which one, at that point they would have bigger clout. Well, they took all their traditions and tried to mishmash them together, and they did a piss poor job of it. One of the terrible things about Exodus is how choppy it is at places, particularly when it comes to law and the commandments. Holy cow, it just gets really weird. And people that are better Hebrew scholars than I will flat out tell you, yeah, it's written by 4 different people. Moses probably didn't have a damn thing to do with it, other than they decided that it's about Moses for the most part, except for Genesis and a few other spots. So, but you're going to find a lot of apologists trying to explain this because it dwells in the realm of freaking special speculation. It is big time speculation as to why the New Testament writers did one and not the other. They don't write out why, they just do it. There's a lot, even more speculation as to why there's 2 different sets of commandments. I think the best explanation is whoever did it, there's a whole bunch of tribes, a whole bunch of different groups, and they all wanted their input into this new work, and they end up mishmashing it together. That's why there's no scholarly works on trying to figure out why. Because they're really, I don't know how you would be scholarly about it because there's just so much speculation about it that it would be very, very difficult. When I did that series, I did try to look that up. I'm like, well, why the hell, do the New Testament writers only quote 1 set of commandments then? Were they stuck in this time warp too? And I think so. Jonathan Gaddish, Jesus getting jiggy with a woman's well. He drinks deeply from her waters. Okay, dude, I get it. Yeah, it is the rest of the comment is about how unlikely it is whether a Jewish man would talk to a woman if it wasn't his wife's sister or mother or a close female relative, especially a Samaritan woman. That's why his disciples would have been very astounded, and it's also why the story is very improbable. I think it's made up, and I think it's made up by people who understood it was a big deal, but they're trying to portray Jesus. The book of John turns Jesus into a rebel and a superpowered man, okay? And I think this is one of those aspects where he's being turned into a rebel. I mean, we already have seen that where he goes into the temple and overthrows the tables, which is an unlikely story. They would have arrested his ass, okay, right away. He hasn't done very many miracles. Nobody knows who he is. At that point, they would have arrested him. This story is equally as unbelievable. I think it's why John spends a whole bunch of time writing about stuff that the other gospel writers don't even write about, because he's making stuff up. Okay, he's literally making stuff up. And I think the story is highly improbable to have happened. I think the Samaritans, believers, wanted to be included by that time in the 2nd century, and so somebody wrote a story about the Samaritan believers and how Jesus visited them, and this is how the story came out. Ben Roberts, it's interesting how Marx makes the baptism the start of Jesus' ministry, like being baptized somehow gave Jesus supernatural abilities. This is actually one of the critical theories about Jesus, because it really does seem that when Jesus is baptized, all of a sudden he becomes the Messiah. Up to that point, he doesn't seem to be anything other than what he is. But at the moment of his baptism, somehow he's superpowered. He goes off into the desert, tempted by the devil after 40 days of fasting, this sort of thing. And then he comes right back, and all of a sudden his ministry is powerful, his teaching is powerful, and it's just like this supercharged thing. I agree with you. Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's interesting. But when you consider the fact that Mark is the first guy to launch this idea, I think Mark introduces the supernatural aspects to Jesus that I don't think existed before. I think up until that point, Jesus was maybe a historical figure that was well known for his teachings, and some of his disciples didn't want his teaching to disappear. And then all of a sudden, somebody says, well, what about his life? And then Mark may be the first guy to sit down. The guy who wrote Mark sits down and says, well, let's give you some of his life story. This is some of the oral tradition that's being passed down. And bam, you get the baptism story where Jesus is superpowered after that. Favorite reason. I remember the verse that preaching the cross is foolishness to those of Paris. At the time, it was so true to me. Now the verse is just another verse in the same cause and effect as telling a woman her life stories. It's always God under a rock, seek and find. Even now, 2,000 years, YouTube has hours of debates of Christians against reason, still all just words. God could just appear to all in a cloud, or tell us where one child is that has been stolen from their parents' pleasure as so-called sin. This is sin not saying where they are. Speaking of knowing a woman's life, maybe Jesus should have said, make sure you wash your hands, especially when operating on people in the furniture. But no, opposite was said. Again, a detailed story written down in the letter. Maybe the preaching of the cross is foolishness to me, and I can't see it. It's surely not. Thank you for your video anytime. Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's amazing that God sends his son, and Jesus doesn't really explain a lot of things that would have been very helpful to humanity down the road. Like, you know what? You should wash up before you do surgery, because that'll prevent, let's talk about germ theory. I mean, just a knowledge of germ theory by Jesus at that point, holy crap, would that have made a difference in society? And that people would have lived longer. They might have developed technologies quicker. All the stuff that comes off of germ theory for medicine is amazing. And we would have been a lot farther along. But no, Jesus spends all his time talking about living water and all this other stuff. Maybe it's because it was written by ignorant people who didn't know any better, and they were just writing a story. I don't know. I look at that story, and there's a lot of unbelievable aspects to it, and it's fun to look at. I remember when I was a Christian, though, what a great example of how to witness to people for Christ. What a great example of how getting people into the door by accepting who they are, but confronting the issues. The problem I have with this story is the real issue of the woman in adultery is the fact that she had 5 husbands and was living with some guy that wasn't her husband. And it wasn't because this was all romance and divorce kind of thing. It was because of the way the culture and society was, that there's no mention of children. So my thoughts are, from a cultural standpoint, if this woman did actually exist, she'd been married 5 times because she hasn't produced a child. Okay, and every time the guy, hangs out with her for 3 years, tries to produce a kid, nope, next. And that happens 5 times. Well, after 5 times, the next guy's like, well, if you want a roof over your head, I got a bed to warm. If you want to sleep in my bed and give me sexual pleasures, I'll let you sleep here. Do some of the chores, go get the water, cook for me, clean for me, screw me, and I'll let you live here. And that was perfectly acceptable. Okay, women were cattle. And this is one of those stories that illustrates that. And to me, what Jesus should have been saying is, you know what? All these men that treat you this way, they're full of shit. But he never addresses that, ever. it's almost like, well, that's just the way it is. And it's like, no, that's a shitty way to live. And, it's okay. It was okay by that culture, and Jesus never addresses it. So, yeah, there's a lot of things there. I think that's it for the comments. I appreciate all of you who comment. I appreciate all the subscribers. Channel's grown to like 36 subscribers at this point, and I'm happy for that. I figured this would be a slow burn, and it still continues to be a slow burn where it's growing and growing, and I appreciate that. You're free to like or dislike. You're free to subscribe, comment, do the things that you do. I appreciate all of you followers and everybody who's been with me for this ride so far. We're getting past the half-year point and moving on. Come next January, it would be a full year. I'm really hoping there's a vaccine for COVID so we can get all this shit sorted out and move along with the rest of our lives. I don't find this to be living as much as I could be. But that said, I do appreciate all of you stopping by, and I trust that this video has been somewhat helpful in addressing some of your thoughts and concerns. In the meantime, I hope that someday I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Rabyd, also known as the Rabid Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.